My name is Larry Felsen, and I'm a volunteer with the International Emergency Campaign to Free Iran's Political Prisoners, IEC, and we welcome you to this important event. The name and title and theme of the seminar, webinar, teach-in is Persistent Brave Resistance by Iran's Women Prisoners Up Against Execution Surge and Threats of Wider Regional War. As we can see from the recent events, things are tensing up in the Middle East, and this webinar comes at a very important point. As the skies of the Middle East fill with rockets and missiles and jets, and the danger of wider war looms, we want to thank everyone for coming to this extremely important program. And also special thanks to the UUSF Conversations group for co-hosting this with us. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Neuberger, who is a member of the UUSF Human Rights Working Group, and he's going to read a welcoming statement from Reverend Millie Phillips.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the UUSF Human Rights Working Group and its Global Conversations Program, I welcome those here in the Thomas Starr King Room and those of you online from whatever part of the United States or the world you're coming in from or you're at. I'm going to read a statement, as Larry mentioned, from Millie Phillips, who could not be here today because she's traveling and maybe even stepping on a plane at this very moment. So here's Millie's statement. Sorry I was not able to be with you today. I hope this event will be successful in organizing support for women and other political prisoners in Iran, many of whom face execution for their advocacy for women's rights and Kurdish rights in opposition to theocracy. At a time when people throughout the world face increasing authoritarianism, protests by these brave prisoners offer inspiration under the most dire circumstances. An injury to one is truly an injury to all. Let's do what we can to save and free these courageous role models of dissent.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you to Millie, and thank you to UUSF. So I'm going to kick things off with some introductory remarks to lay the context and framework for this teach-in, and to take on, which is intended to take on some, burning issues and questions that we're all very much vitally concerned with at this time. As the situation, as we see, is rapidly developing, a massive U.S. military buildup has been taking place in the Middle East. Warships and jets and 20 billion in arms to Israel, and open threats by the U.S. against Iran. The IEC at this time calls for opposition to all moves by the U.S. to attack or support an attack on Iran from U.S. or U.S. proxy Israel, while at the same time the IEC opposes the horrific escalation of executions and repression in Iran and stands with the courageous resistance of the political prisoners, especially the women prisoners in Evin Prison, whom you're about to see in a moving video compilation created with audio of protests inside Evin Prison in July. Many of these heroic women, including 2023 Nobel laureate prize winner Narges Mohammadi, were viciously assaulted by prison guards and denied medical treatment. Here's the video. We're going to go on now to another video, and this is a bilingual poem. Read at Revolution Books in last year. It's called "The Hair of Women" by Rafael J. González. He's a professor, poet, laureate emeritus from Berkeley, California, and he enclosed a solidarity message as well. The political prisoners, many of them women, must be released by the fundamentalist theocratic government of Iran. Injustice and oppression must be resisted by all people of goodwill. And here's the video of him reading his poem.
I was born and raised right on the Mexican-US border. So consequently, most of my poems are written in the two languages. El cabello de la mujer, Agina Masa Amini. El cabello de las mujeres, rizado como lana fina marina, o como el zarcillo de la parra, ondulado como las ondas de un estanque, o lacio como la crin de un caballo, no debe ser visto en público. Dicen los hombres que gobiernan, porque dicen que incita la lujuria de los hombres, según su idea tóxica, patriarcal. Pero la opresión engendra rebelión, y tu corazón estalló con necesidad de libertad, de dejar el sol calentar tu pelo suelto para que el viento lo peinara, la luna lo acariciara. Por este simple acto te tomaron, te encarcelaron, te golpearon y moriste. Pero tu muerte fue chispa que encendió las llamas, la yesca de las vidas recortadas de las mujeres, y ellas tomaron a las calles por el mundo entero. En pie, hermanas, por la mujer, la vida, libertad. Y nosotros, tus hermanos, estamos con ustedes porque nadie es libre si las mujeres no la son. The Hair of Women, for Gina Masa Amini. The hair of women, tightly curled as fine merino wool, or loosely like the vine's tendril, or wavy like the ripples in a pond, or straight as a horse's mane, must not be seen in public, say the men who rule, because they say that it incites men's lust according to their idea of God, toxic and patriarchal. But oppression breeds rebellion, and your heart bursts with need of freedom to let the sun warm your hair, let loose for the wind to comb it, the moon caress it. For the simple act, you were taken, imprisoned, beaten, and you died. But your death was a spark that set aflame the tinder of women's curtailed lives, and they took to the streets worldwide. Stand, sisters, for the woman, life, freedom. And we, your brothers, stand with you because no one is free unless women are.
We're going to hear the panelists now, and we're going to start with Stephen Zunes. Stephen Zunes is the professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, where he served as founding director of the program in Middle East Studies. Please welcome Stephen Zunes.
Thank you. I want to start, I will not be talking specifically on the topic at hand in terms of the plight of women political prisoners, though certainly I share my solidarity with their struggle and my great appreciation for those of you who have been more in the trenches, as it were, in support. I want to speak as someone familiar with the international relations of the region, and as well as familiar with the history of resistance in Iran, and try to put things in a broader context. First of all, there's been some real confusion on the left, in some segments of the left here in this country. For decades, the leading challenges to Western imperialism were progressive. Some of these governments and movements were more militaristic and authoritarian for my taste, but at least they were a better alternative than colonialism, neo-colonialism, imperialism. We look at Vietnam, we look at Central America. It was no question, who the progressive forces were. The problem that a lot of people don't quite understand is that many of today's leading forces against Western imperialism are in fact reactionary. When we look at Eastern Europe, we see Putin, Lukashenko, Orban. We see the Burmese generals. We see Salafists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And of course, we see Iran. And Iran itself is an imperialist power. Not only incredibly reactionary and oppressive in terms of the Iranian people themselves, but in terms of the forces it supports throughout the region. The recognition of this is complicated by looking at the flagrant hypocrisy of the United States. The U.S. government quite correctly criticizes Iran for its reactionary interpretation of Islam, its treatment of women and religious minorities, its execution and harsh sentences of political prisoners, its support for extremist organizations, its intervention in neighboring countries. But of course, you could say the exact same things about Saudi Arabia. In fact, in certain ways, Saudi Arabia is even worse than Iran on these counts. And yet the United States provides that family dictatorship with many billions of dollars worth of arms sales and other security assistance. Similarly, as long as the United States supports Israel's genocidal war on Gaza and its brutal military occupation, as long as the U.S. continues to support the various reactionary Arab dictatorships, and it continues its bombing of Muslim countries and its stationing of military bases and periodic intervention, the Iranian regime will be able to project itself as an anti-imperialist force. The fact that Iran is surrounded by U.S. bases, that their carrier groups, huge naval presence, right off their coast, given the history of U.S. intervention, the overthrow of Mossadegh, the last democratic government the country had, along with the tanker war in the 1980s. You could go on the huge list of provocations. This really feeds the narrative that that makes it hard for many anti-imperialists in the West to acknowledge the nature of the Iranian regime. And there's also the threat of a direct war. I mean, the Senate passed a unanimous resolution a few years ago that said if the government of Israel is compelled to take military action in legitimate self-defense against Iran's nuclear weapons program, the United States should provide Israel with whatever support it needs, militarily and otherwise. And so in other words, they're insisting the U.S. join a war with Iran, even if Israel attacks Iran first. Now, where this fits into the domestic situation is that Iranians are incredibly nationalistic. And the regime is taking advantage of this nationalism. And one of the big mistakes the U.S. made in Vietnam was we saw the National Liberation Front, what we call the Viet Cong, as communist, and yes, they're communist led, but they're first and foremost, they were a nationalist movement. And so we couldn't understand. We said, well, if it's a totalitarian movement, we have to meet it, with incredible military force. Yet we wondered why the more troops we sent in, the more we bombed, the stronger the resistance became. And that's because they are able to build on that nationalism. And similarly, we look at Iran, and the fact is that these threats from the United States is enabling the regime to take advantage of that nationalist reaction. I was in Iran a few years ago, and I talked to a lot of people who, of course, are very, very, very much opposed to the regime. I mean, they could go on and tell you about how their families have suffered, the corruption, the repression, and everything else. Of course, the treatment of women. Knew people who had family members in prison. But when it came to the nuclear issue, they were like, come on now. The United States supports Israel, Pakistan, India. They really do have nuclear weapons. They're also in violation of UN Security Council resolutions about their nuclear programs. Who or hell is the United States to tell Iran that we can't have a civilian nuclear program? And the fact is that the greater the political, we've looked at this historically over the decades, the greater when there's strong pressure from the United States, it reduces the political space for change. When things have been less pressure, less threats, there is more of a political opening, both for reformers within the system, but also for the opposition. Despite all this, I still have hope for change in Iran. In many ways, I see Iran today like Eastern Europe in the 1970s. They're not at a point where they can bring down the system, but the ideological is gone. They no longer believe the propaganda. And just as working people in Eastern Europe in the 1970s said, this is not socialism. This is a self-perpetuating elite who are using socialist rhetoric to maintain their grip on power. And similarly, more and more Iranians, even those who believe in the idea of an Islamic Republic in theory, recognize that the current government is neither, and they are ready to change. We have a well-educated population, supported by a well-educated, relatively affluent diaspora. And we're talking about a people with a remarkable history of civil resistance. We go back to the tobacco strike in the 1890s, the Constitutional Revolution, 1906, the revolution against the Shah, and the repeated uprisings in recent decades against the Islamic regime, each one larger, each one more diverse, each one more widespread. Now, we hear the regime and its apologists claim that these are somehow machinations of U.S. Interference. But come now. Americans can no more teach Iranians about civil resistance than we can teach them how to cook pheasant. I mean, this is Iran has this amazing history of popular resistance to oppression. And as horrible as things are right now, And as frustrating as it is to see Washington's policies, making things more difficult for those who want change, I do believe we are going to see real change in Iran. And, we need to maintain our solidarity. We need to have a broad tent. I mean, I've been called, both an imperialist bent on regime change for the sake of U.S. hegemony and corporate profits, and I've also been called a shill and an apologist for the regime. But the fact is that one can oppose U.S. policy and oppose the Islamic Republic as well. One can support the just struggle of Iranian women and other dissenters, while also supporting the struggles of the people of Palestine, of Western Sahara, for an end to their occupations, and for the people of Egypt and Bahrain and countries throughout the region who are also struggling for their freedom. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you this morning, and thank you for the folks for putting together a critically important issue, and people deserve our solidarity. And I've been around enough to see how solidarity movements such as these have indeed made a difference, have indeed played a critical role in enabling people under oppression to be more effective in their resistance. So thanks again.
Thank you, Stephen Zunes. Very powerful. We're now going to hear from our next speaker, who is Lili Babayi. Lili is a revolutionary communist, supporter of the Communist Party of Iran, MLM, and a follower of revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. She is fighting to put an end to the oppression of women and of LGBTQ people in Iran and around the world. She thinks this is not possible without breaking with the system of capitalism, imperialism, and Islamic fundamentalism as part of that. Please welcome Lili.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciate that you organized such an important event. I'm gonna share my screen with you, and I'm gonna start by reminding that right now, 2 women political prisoners, Sharifeh Mohammadi and Pakhshan Azizi, are facing death sentence in Iran. The charge is Bagh, an Islamic judicial term, which means war against God. In the last year alone, this regime has executed more than 800 people, more than what United States police kills Black people on the streets. Today here, I mainly want to give a factual sense of how Islamic Republic of Iran rules over nearly 90 million of my people and your people in Iran. I do not want to go into the world historic conditions that gave rise to the forces of Islamic fundamentalism in 20th century and in Iran led to formation of Islamic Republic of Iran. Bob Avakian have analyzed this and put forward crucially important concept of two outmoded, which has proven to be correct many times and continues to do so. I encourage you to study his historical materialist analysis and concept of two outmoded very carefully. But let me explain some of the evidences that proves this theory and proves there is nothing good or progressive about Islamic Republic of Iran. During Women Life Freedom Uprising, that now we are approaching actually to its anniversary, second anniversary, more than 500 people were killed. Many deliberately were blinded by bullets made in Germany and other European countries. and few thousands were arrested. Young rebellious women as young as Nikasha Karami, who was only 16 years old, were targeted, raped, and killed in the streets. The suppression was more deadly in areas like Kurdistan and Balochistan. In Zahedan, only on one day that is called now the Bloody Friday, 90 people were killed brutally. The high school girls who had taken off their scarves, including in the religious city of Qom, which is considered the Vatican or seat of Shia clergy, was gas bombed by fatwa. Fatwa is a religious permission issued by religious authorities. All of this brutally happened because people, especially women, were rising up against one of the most important ideological pillars of Islamic Republic, mandatory hijab, and thus against the whole regime. Mandatory hijab was the first step in imposing the standards of Islamic Sharia on women, in imposing the standards of traditional Islamic ethics and the Islamic patriarchal system on the relationships between men and women and all over society, and has been the symbol of Islamic rule over society and inferior position of women. Hijab was never a matter of a scarf or a personal choice, but a matter of oppressive relation concentrated in it. Whoever disobeyed this would face gasht irshad or morality police. Like Jina Amini, many other girls experienced this, including me, myself. We got arrested, sent to some centers to promise to not repeat this crime, or if we repeat it, we would face fines or prison. The systematic oppression against women is woven into the laws of Islamic Republic, which is based on Sharia law. According to Article 1105 of the Civil Procedure Law in Iran, a woman is obliged to submit and obey her husband, both in daily affairs and in sexual matters. Against this submission, the woman is considered entitled to receive living expenses. According to this principle, a woman should give in to any kind of sexual desire of a man in any condition and in any situation. Coercion in sexual relations or rape in Iran has a legal and religious basis. Buying and selling of girls over 9 years old by a legal guardian who is a father or parental ancestor is illegal, and it is not considered forced marriage because the father or paternal ancestor agrees to it. So basically, it means they can give a girl over 9 years of age to any man for rape. While same-sex relationship and marriage is illegal, and gay people can even face death sentence for practicing homosexuality. Women who have sex outside marriage can be stoned to death based on Sharia. Women's subjection is symbolized by this mandatory hijab and the right of male members of their family to kill their daughters, wives, sisters if they commit sex outside religious boundaries. Honor killing, which had vanished in Iran, made a comeback during the rule of Islamic Republic. Women cannot divorce, cannot get abortion, cannot get custody of their children over 7 years old, cannot travel abroad or even work if their husbands do not permit. So yes, Handmaid's Tale is based on reality under Islamic Republic in Iran. And this has been the story since day one of Islamic Republic, now for over 45 years. The day after this regime seized power, Ayatollah Khomeini sent his butcher priest called Ayatollah Khalkhali with unlimited authorization on an execution trip around the country. He arrested and executed immediately intellectuals, teachers, students who were known to be communists. Shocking pictures of mass executions are in internet. 2 weeks after coming to power, Khomeini called for mandatory Islamic hijab, which faced with a nationwide protest by women. A year later, tens of thousands of teachers were purged from educational system for being un-Islamic. Music instruments and art performance of women were banned. The Islamic Republic forged its main military wing, the Revolutionary Guard of the Islamic Revolution, Sepah Pastaran Enqilab Islami, in war against the Kurdish and Turkmen and Arab people between 1979 and 1981. In 1980, Ayatollah Khomeini ordered the Islamization of the universities. They killed many students during implementation of this religious order. According to regime's statistic, in a matter of 2 years, the number of the university teachers halved from more than 16,000 to less than 8,000. This counter-revolution was called cultural revolution. Here, I want you to take a moment to think how Islamic Republic has been misusing very important words and filling them with completely different meanings that made people confused, such as calling a regime change from Shah reactionary regime to Mullah's reactionary regime as a revolution, calling an anti-enlightenment and backward religious ideology as anti-imperialism, and calling oppression and subordination of women in patriarchal families and society as dignity for women. So we really have to take back these words and redefine them. I will come back to some of this later. In 1981, all workers, students, teachers, nurses, councils were banned and many arrested and later executed. Every kind of party was outlawed and thousands of left activists, as well as activists of an Islamic organization called Mujahideen, were arrested in 1982 and many were executed in a matter of days. Many of the organization were mass buried in Khavaran cemetery without any names on their graves. This is a cemetery in Tehran which belongs to Baha'i faith, and since the communists are considered unclean, they were buried in Baha'i cemetery, who are equally considered out of Islamic faith and therefore unclean. The war with Iraq started in 1980 and lasted 8 years, and the guiding slogan was to capture the Holy Land in Iraq, such as Najaf and Karbala. They got hundreds of thousands of young men massacred by deliberately sending them on the minefields in order to clear the way for advance of the Revolutionary Guard. After Islamic Republic of Iran accepted ceasefire with Iraq in 1988, there were nearly 10,000 political prisoners in Iran. In summer of 1988, more than half were given death sentence in 2 minutes retrials and were executed in a matter of 2 weeks. Their bodies were carried out of Evin and other prisons to cemeteries by meat vans. All of the above are documented by human rights groups inside the country, as well as the Amnesty International and other agencies. I can go for another several hours to enumerate just facts of crimes of this regime, and yet I still have not covered Islamic Republic's crimes against Palestinians, Iraqi, Afghanistani, and Syrian people. Just to mention 3 facts, in Beirut, the Islamic Republic of Iran forged the Hezbollah by opening the way for massacre of the Palestinian refugees in Beirut to operation of Israeli butcher Ariel Sharon. Our party have investigated this through Palestinian comrades who were in the field helping and supporting the Palestinian refugees. Islamic Republic of Iran worked with the US Army in Iraq in 2004 to brutally put down the Fallujah uprising and other crimes of Quds Force of Islamic Republic under Qasem Soleimani have leaked out through WikiLeaks and covered by intercepts. Go search for yourself. In Syria, Qasem Soleimani is called Butcher Soleimani, butcher of the kids in Syria. Yet, this regime is often considered anti-imperialist by some assorted left forces, not just in Iran, but also Germany, UK, United States, etc. With this kind of anti-imperialist, who really needs imperialists? And recently, you can see growth of that kind of trend among pro-Palestinian people in the universities. Generally, this is due to the lack of understanding of the real nature of the Islamic Republic, as well as what really imperialism is. But those who theorize Islamic Republic's so-called anti-imperialism and glorify a filthy alliance called Axis of Resistance are into instrumentalist reactionary position. They are exact mirror image of those who defend Gaza genocide by all kinds of equally reactionary bullshit about Jews having a Holocaust past to carry out their own Holocaust. Among these people, especially those who outrageously call themselves communist and revolutionary, are not to be trusted for any positive for Palestinian people or for any other people at all. They are opportunists who are siding with not only a criminal fascist theocracy such as Islamic Republic, but also with Russian imperialists and Chinese imperialists who are trying to replace and take over Middle East from the United States and Western imperialist powers. You should check out crimes of Russian Wagner mercenary army in Africa and economic plunder of that continent by China. The specific axis of resistance people that we know of are political wing of Russian imperialist war mercenaries. They are mentored by the pro-Putin Communist Party of Russia, who still wields the old red banner with the hammer and sickle of USSR time. We have these kinds of communists in Iran, the Tudeh Party and Fedayeen majority, who united with the Islamic Republic to suppress revolutionary communists, including in Amol insurrection, as well as aiding the interrogators of the Islamic Republic in prison against the revolutionary communists. This story is documented and evidenced as well. The phony thesis of anti-imperialism and axis of resistance to imperialism propaganda is supposed to match up the Western imperialist ideological war against Russian and Chinese imperialist democracy versus autocracy, etc. Those who have rallied around each of these poles are just foot soldiers and duped for one or another imperialist power, and each side have their own dark ages religious fundamentalists who raise the bar of reactionariness. Don't be charmed for the reactionaries and imperialists. We, the people of the Middle East, need to forge our own movement for revolution with real revolutionary communist leadership based on new communism and the leadership of Bob Avakian. Thank you.
Next, our third speaker is Gavrilah Wells. Gavrilah is a longtime human rights activist and social justice advocate. She is the coordinator for Amnesty International USA, Group 30, based in San Francisco, and is an Amnesty International Death Penalty Abolition Coordinator for California. Welcome, Gavrilah Wells. Go ahead, Gavrilah.
So, yes, my name is Gavrilah. You can call me G. My pronouns are she, her. And I am one of 2 state death penalty abolition coordinators for the state of California, and which means that we actually focus mainly on California's death penalty and criminal justice reform, and including solitary confinement and life without the possibility of parole, etc. And then the country as well as in the United States. So with that said, I am by no means an expert on Iran. There is an Amnesty chapter in the South Bay, AIUSA Local Group 1023, that is focused entirely on human rights in Iran. And I highly recommend folks who want to be involved with Amnesty International that they get connected with them. Just very quickly, Amnesty International is a global movement of over 10 million people in 150 countries and demanding human rights for everyone, no matter who or where they are. Amnesty is the world's oldest, largest grassroots human rights organization. And since 1961, everyday people, just like all of us, from all around the world, have been taking action in defense of human rights for everyone. My mom was an Amnesty member, and I grew up with Amnesty in my living room. Here in the US, Amnesty International has over 1 million members and activists in all 50 states. Some of our members are experts on specific human rights issues in parts of the world or advocacy areas, and they serve as volunteer leaders. I am a volunteer focused on the death penalty in California, and we do have an AIUSA country specialist focused on Iran. I wish I was her right now, but I'm not. So with that said, I'm going to just talk about very briefly about some of the more recent executions in Iran. And it's been wonderful hearing from Lili and Professor Zunes, with the larger issue. And I've learned a lot so far. I do have 2 beautiful nieces whose mom was Baha'i and fled Iran back in I believe the late 70s. So this all is in my soul on a very familial level as well. I really want to emphasize something before I continue, and that is that Amnesty is a nonpartisan NGO. Amnesty never calls for a regime change, nor do we, does Amnesty ever advocate for candidates, and there is a very stringent guideline on all messaging, and if you've ever had to work with Amnesty on issues, you will have experienced that, perhaps with some frustration. So with that said, I'm also going to say that although I'm going to be digging into some of Amnesty's materials, I'm not here representing Amnesty. I'm here as a human rights activist and conveying some of Amnesty's death penalty research, recent research, and general information on Iran. So with that said, I'm guessing everybody in this room agrees that the death penalty is the ultimate cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment. It violates the most fundamental human right, the right to life, as proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And Amnesty opposes the death penalty in all cases without exception, regardless of the nature of circumstances of the crime, regarding guilt, innocence, or other characteristics of the individual, and regardless of the method used by the state to carry out the execution. Every year, Amnesty researchers produce an annual global death penalty report. The 2023 global report noted that there was an alarming 31% increase in global executions because of this, because of the spike in executions in Iran. Iran alone accounted for 74% of all recorded executions. As I'm sure many of you know, 853 people were executed in Iran. Sentenced to death people were executed in Iran, including protesters, social media users, and dissidents, as well as individuals from the most impoverished communities and convicted of drug offenses. As Iranian authorities refused to provide public statistics of death sentences and executions to record the number of executions carried out in 2023, Amnesty International worked closely with Abdurrahman Bolhaman Center, drawing from open sources, including reports by state media, independent media, and human rights organizations. The organization also reviewed the execution logs of Iran Human Rights and Kurdistan Human Rights Network. So these are just recorded executions in Iran, and the numbers are most likely much higher than that. And just to note, because there's no way of getting access to China's recorded numbers, it is well in the thousands. So there's no way of knowing exact numbers for China. Since the Woman Life Freedom Uprising of September through December 2022, the Iranian authorities have embarked on a brutal killing spree, using the death penalty as a tool of oppression to create a pervasive sense of fear across the country, exert control over the population, and tighten their grip on power at any cost. The increase in executions from previous years is largely due to the draconian war on drugs, resulting in the executions of at least 481 people in 2023 in retaliation to drug-related offenses, and 29% of them are from the oppressed Baluchi minority, and apologies to folks if I'm pronouncing any words incorrectly. At least 545 people were executed for acts that never should result in the death penalty under international law, including acts that are protected by the rights to privacy and freedom of expression, religion, or belief. And Lili was talking about a lot of that just now. And also for overly broad and vaguely worded charges that don't meet the principle of legality, and for the drug-related and other offenses that don't involve intentional killing. The use of the death penalty was continued disproportionately to impact Iran's oppressed Baluchi ethnic minority, which constitutes only 5% of Iran's population, but it accounted in 2023 for 20% of all the executions, and at least 172 Baluchi people were executed. The death penalty, the authorities also used the death penalty to punish individuals who had challenged or were perceived as having challenged the Islamic Republic establishment and its politico-religious ideologies. In 2023, the authorities executed at least 7 people in connection with woman life freedom protests of 2022, and 1 was in connection with the nationwide protests of November 2019. Additionally, the authorities executed at least 2 social media users for apostasy and insulting the Prophet of Islam, and at least 6 individuals belonging to oppressed ethnic or religious minorities for their real or perceived affiliation with political groups deemed hostile by the authorities. They executed 5 children, including a 17-year-old boy, Hamid Reza Azari, and in fact, they misrepresented his age as 18 in state media to evade accountability, and 4 other young individuals who were under 18 at the time of the crime were also executed. And these, again, are reported executions. At least 520 people were arbitrarily executed after convicted and sentencing by revolutionary courts, which lack independence and operate under the influence of security and intelligence bodies. So amid domestic calls for the abolition of the death penalty, including from many people who are imprisoned on death row, the Iranian authorities have doubled down and persisted with their state-sanctioned killing spree, which has turned the prisons into killing fields. And without a robust global response, the Iranian authorities will continue using the death penalty as a tool of oppression, and unfortunately are likely to execute thousands more. So this requires each of us in our own way to take action regularly on behalf of people in Iran and obviously everywhere. We're all here today because we care. We care about human beings, we care about human rights. And Amnesty is a huge proponent in everyday actions, which is often letter writing, vigils, etc. And I believe our meetings used to be held at the Unitarian Center. So we're very like-minded in that way. So I also want to note that according to Abdurrahman Boraman Center, there have been 81 executions so far in August, apparently. They may have risen since yesterday, I don't know. And 403 thus far in 2024. And then a Guardian article from last Friday cites a Human Rights Watch article stating that at least 87 people were reportedly executed in July, and with another 29 who were executed on one single day in this month. Which brings us to Reza Rasai. He was an amnesty case, and he was sentenced to death for his participation in the Woman Life Freedom protests, and he was arbitrarily executed in secret at 5 a.m. local time in Iran on August 6th in Abad prison. The authorities did not give any prior notice to Reza, his family, or his lawyer. Within hours of informing his family of his execution, the authorities cruelly forced his family to bury his body in a remote area far from his home and in the presence of security forces. Reza Raisaei was sentenced to death on October 7, 2023, after a grossly unfair trial that relied on forced confessions obtained under torture and other ill treatment, including beatings, electric shocks, suffocation, and sexual violence. Reza Raisaei is the 10th individual to be executed in relation to the Woman Life Freedom uprising. I just want to note one of the most horrifying forms of torture that I've been reading about is the mock executions, taking people to think that they're about to be executed and going through the motions, and then they're not executed. I mean, obviously an execution is more horrific, but to keep having to relive. I have a dear friend who was almost executed here in California. He came under 4 hours from being executed, and he's still highly, highly traumatized. So I can't even comprehend the trauma of having these mock executions again and again. So as Nargis was mentioned earlier by the lovely moderator, so on August, and we heard the voices of the women. On August 6th, the Women's Ward of Evin Prison, which has been taking part in the No to Executions protest campaign for months, bravely partaking, held demonstration following Raisaei's execution. And I'm guessing most of us here are well aware that prison security personnel assaulted the protesting women, beating and injuring many of them, including Nargis Mohammadi. She is obviously the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, a longtime human rights and death penalty champion, abolition champion. According to her cellmates, Mohammadi, who has been denied direct communication with her family since November 2023, was repeatedly punched in the chest by security and military forces, causing her to collapse and lose consciousness. She has pre-existing health issues that make this kind of beating extra tricky. She's got lung and heart issues. Mohammadi has requested access to her lawyer to file a complaint about the physical violence, as well as a forensic examination of her injuries, and both requests were apparently denied by the Evin Prison authorities. On August 21st, just a couple days ago, 15 UN human rights experts condemned the physical violence against Nargis and other political prisoners in Evin Prison, and they stress that our deep concerns about the physical and mental integrity of Nargis Mohammadi have been communicated to the Iranian government. Once again, we call on Iranian authorities to release her immediately and ensure her access to full medical care without delay, along with other detainees. Now, one thing that Amnesty does, and also can limit some Amnesty members sometimes in terms of publicly calling for us to people to take action, urgent actions are submitted, and all the cases are highly vetted, communicated with the legal teams, et cetera. And sometimes it might take a little while for an urgent action to be updated. So at the end, when I finish in a few minutes, I am going to put actions that everyone can take into the chat. Please take action. These are 2 urgent actions that I would really appreciate everyone taking as soon as possible. Mojahed Kurkuri is in grave risk of execution in connection with the 2022 uprising. He is being held in solitary confinement and has been repeatedly subjected to torture and other ill treatment. And according to information received by Amnesty, he was not at the protest taking place on the 16th of November 2023, the day for which he is accused. And he is accused of a 9-year-old child who was fatally shot by security officials. Well, the family of the 9-year-old child believe that security officials killed their child, and they are calling and being very brave and demanding that he was not involved in the killing of their loved one, and they have repeatedly and publicly attributed responsibility to Iran's security forces. So it's just a double bizarre conundrum. And then we have Ahmadreza Jalali. He's a Swedish Iranian academic. He's arbitrarily detained in Iran for over 8 years, and he's in grave risk of execution. He's exhausted all of his legal appeal avenues to overturn his death sentence. And in fact, he just finished a hunger strike. And if you look on social media, you'll see some really horrific photographs of him. He's skeletal at this point, if one is to believe those are actual, and I personally do. And so he's been protesting his continued arbitrary detention it's following a prisoner swap that happened between Iran and Sweden, and it completely ignored him. This swap happened on June 15th. And while we're happy that the swap occurred and that others were saved, we're hoping that people will please take action on his behalf. He needs to get back to Sweden. So please take these actions. I want to highlight Toomaj. We've already talked about Toomaj. I know there's going to be a video. His death sentence was overturned, but as we know, with these folks, anything can happen. And so we all still need to take continued action until his release. He's still there, but he has been apparently acquitted. These are the actions. I will put them in the chat. And I just want to say that Amnesty has a bunch of demands for Iran, or we don't call them demands, but a large list of things we want Iran to do. But really, we need to get observer states to initiate criminal investigations, and everyone to basically join in this really important horrific human rights catastrophe. And I really am honored to be here, and that is all I have for you.
All right. You know, we're going to go to the next speaker, but you know, it's just amazing to look at how powerful it is. These women and other political prisoners continue to protest, you know, in the face of this executions and repression. You know, you know, it's just, we need to really support them in every way that we can. Our next speaker is Dolly Veale. Dolly is a co-initiator of the IEC, together with longtime feminist and abortion advocate Carol Downer. Dolly is also a spokesperson for the IEC and a contributing writer to revcom.us, and contributes to Revcom's American Crime series. Welcome, Dolly.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you to all my other panelists, and to the UUSF and the people who are at the UUSF and online. Welcome. And I want to especially thank our tech team and our IEC volunteers who worked very hard to produce this event, and I hope that it will spread after this. I will be speaking today decidedly from my own perspective, even though it will encompass my role in relationship to the International Emergency Campaign, but it will not be limited to that. And some of my presentation by necessity will be a little compressed, and therefore I will have a follow-up discussion of some of these mega points in terms of the world we confront. Other speakers have laid out the dangerous situation for Iran's political prisoners with the shocking surge of executions recently. Yet in the face of beatings, torture, and executions, there is continued heroic resistance by the political prisoners, especially the women in Evin Prison. All this is taking place against a backdrop of volatile, complex contention in a situation fraught with sudden changes in Iran and in the region. My talk will address our special responsibility as people living in this country, a country aptly known as the belly of the beast. In co-initiating this campaign to free Iran's political prisoners as a revolutionary communist, I do so from an internationalist orientation that the whole world comes first, of proceeding from the interests of humanity all over the world in opposition to America first. I also have a certain affinity for the persistent struggle of people in Iran for liberation going back to 1979, even as that revolution was hijacked by the Islamic fundamentalists. First, I want to say that this webinar is extremely timely. As the US and Israeli threats and attacks on Iran and its allies intensified in recent months, it was said to the IEC that this is not the time to criticize the Islamic Republic. But it's just the opposite. We must seize the time right now to stand with those selfless and fearless voices calling to us from behind Iran's prison walls. They are putting it all on the line for a better world. There are real stakes for the world to know that these brave resistors are up against a fascist theocracy, one that disguises as anti-imperialist and is not an alternative or model for a future we want to live in, as Lili spoke to. You can see from today's teaching that such harmful lies about an axis of resistance are paid for by the blood of our sisters and brothers in Iran. Yet these lies are adopted by too many so-called leftists in the US. The IEC has been told by liberal academics that our campaign helps the US. These treacherous views suffocate the righteous resistance and the potential for real revolution in Iran because they conflate what is oppression with what is real liberation. These lies help Iran's mullahs as well as the US imperialists by throwing Iran's political prisoners and all its resistors under the bus. You saw the video of the women prisoners chanting in Evin during their all-night sit-in protesting executions. It was their freedom song, but also a challenge to all of us that they're willing to risk their health and their very lives for the fight for emancipation. Imagine this lofty spirit catching on in our world today, for people to stand up against oppression and demand a far better future. Look at how the No to Execution Tuesday hunger strikes in Iran have spread to nearly 20 prisons across Iran for over 7 months, despite executions raging in some of the very same facilities. Their determination is breathtaking and must be firmly and broadly supported and emulated by all who crave justice. There is a special responsibility for those of us living in the US to stand with the people of Iran. This has to do with the whole history and current reality of US domination and interference in distorting Iran's economy and politics, which Stephen and Lili also spoke to, including crippling sanctions down to today. Manajir Moradian has an insight in her book. Her book is called This Flame Within, Iranian Revolutionaries in the United States. She finds that the protests against the US puppet Shah's regime and that against the Islamic regime today have a common thread. Both involve a fierce struggle against extreme repression of political dissent. There is a link between the struggle to free political prisoners under the Shah and his hated secret police, the Savak, and the fight to free those persecuted by the hated Islamic Revolutionary Guard today. Note the Savak was trained and worked closely with the CIA and Israel's secret police, the Mossad. This historical reality argues against those who yearn to go back to the so-called good old days with a new US puppet. In 1979, many people were confused or naive about the first Islamic fundamentalist state that rose to power. Iran claimed and did, in fact, in some ways act against the interests of the US imperialists and Zionist Israel, given Iran's, ambition in the region as a regional power. But Iran's political prisoners and dissidents, especially in the 2022 Women Life Freedom Uprising, have told the world that Iran's theocracy is reactionary, not liberatory. This can be seen also in the extreme misogyny under Sharia law, but also to be understood by examining the actual content of its social economic system. I suggest that you check out the work of the Communist Party of Iran, Marxist-Leninist Maoists, that Lili spoke about. You will also find exposure of all this at revcom.us under the heading Repression, Resistance, and the Potential for Revolution in Iran. And read the article that's called The Islamic Republic of Iran is Not Anti-Imperialist. It's a Dark Ages capitalist nightmare. On the IEC website, under Resources, Background, and Analysis, there's this important comment that says, and Lili referenced it, this, analysis. It says, some of us working on this campaign have been inspired by the groundbreaking analysis of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian on the clash between imperialism and Islamic fundamentalism. We find this analysis to be an accurate framework to understand the global dynamics and symbiotic relations between these two contending oppressive powers. And it says, in Basics this is a quote from Basics from the Talks and Writings of Bob Avakian, quote 128, where he wrote, what we see in contention here, this is the quote, what we see in contention here with jihad on the one hand and World Crusade, which is the increasing globalized Western imperialism, on the other hand, are historically outmoded strata among colonized and oppressed humanity up against historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system. These two reactionary poles reinforce each other even while opposing each other. If you side with either of these outmodeds, you end up strengthening both. While this is a very important formulation and is crucial to understanding much of the dynamics driving things in the world in this period, at the same time, we do have to be clear about which of these historically outmodeds has done the greater damage and poses the greater threat to humanity. It is the historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system, and in particular, the US imperialists, end quote. The political prisoners in Iran are being ruthlessly oppressed by the outmoded system in Iran. Yet their resistance is a bold call across the world to people to stand up for human emancipation, especially for the half of humanity that is female. There is a vanguard party in Iran based on the new communism brought forward by Bob Avakian, which could possibly be a game changer. Why? Because the goal of this revolution is complete emancipation of humanity, of all humanity, not revenge by the oppressed or the poisonous notion that the ends justify the means. The ends justify the means, which is poison. Part of our responsibility to people in Iran has to do with the fact that what happens in the US affects the whole world, due to the US being a superpower imperialist since World War II. Yes, we are facing two obsolete social economic systems, but imperialism, especially that of the US, has been and is much worse for Iran and right here in the US. But in this country, there is a historical moment, a rare time when revolution is more possible in these times right now. Many of you may be, catching the fascism of Trump that is, kind of permeating our society, as well as the potential for civil war. These are rapidly developing, events in this country. Overall, the way things have been in this country, how the system and society have operated up to now, is being torn apart by the ruling classes as they claw at each other's throats. The 2024 elections may bring it all to a head or even before that. The question is whether there is a force that can seize the time and turn this into the revolution we need. A key question is in all this is leadership. In Iran, the political prisoners, especially the women, are in many ways giving direction to the movement of resistance. But as the CPI MLM says, all this needs to take a leap into a movement for an actual revolution, not simply more militant uprisings. Here in the US, there's the unprecedented revolutionary leadership of Bob Avakian and the RevCom Corps for the emancipation of humanity that he leads. Everyone needs to get their heads out of the clouds and confront the reality we face. And there's no better means to do so than going urgently to the hard-hitting at Bob Avakian official dispatches in real time. If you truly strive to be anti-imperialist, this is the time to make good on it and join with those working to actually overthrow imperialism right where it lives and right where you live. Ariel Dorfman, the world-renowned playwright and author exiled from Chile, in signing the IEC's emergency appeal, wrote poignantly, "I am convinced from personal experience that the prisoners themselves, the prisoners in Iran themselves, are given strength to survive and persevere. They are listening. They know others far away care what happens to them and that we should not let them down." To Iran's political prisoners, especially my revolutionary comrades who are locked up there facing torture and execution, but are providing leadership to advance the struggle, we stand shoulder and shoulder with you to get the monster of imperialism off the backs of Iran and the people of the world. It is part of our responsibility here of not letting you down, but of supporting your struggle to overthrow the IRI and free the people from the system of capitalist Islamic theocracy. Many more people need to step forward to stand with and be part of fighting to free Iran's political prisoners. Many more need to actively support their urgent demand to stop the executions. From my personal perspective, this also means many more need to step forward to bring down US imperialism at a time when it is sharply posed just what future humanity will have. I'm arguing that we have a special responsibility in this country on many fronts and several levels, especially on the level of a real revolution. If you're interested in further discussion of this, I will hold a special Zoom meeting soon, and you can sign up with your email in the chat. In closing, I urge you to get involved with the IEC to demand the Islamic Republic of Iran free all political prisoners now, stop the executions, and to demand of the US government no threats or war moves against Iran, lift US sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolly. I want to introduce Raymond Nat Turner, who is going to read a poem. Raymond Nat Turner is a poet in residence at Black Agenda Report and former co-chair of the New York chapter of the National Writers Union, and he will be reading his poem, Can We Walk, Talk, Chew Gum, Text, and Breathe at the Same Time? Take it away, Raymond.
Yeah, greetings, everyone, and thank you for having me. I have been on since the program began and have learned quite a bit. So anyway, this piece is called Will We Walk, Talk, Chew Gum, Text, and Breathe at the Same Time? Epigraph, quote, power concedes nothing without the demand. It never did, and it never will. End quote. Frederick Douglass. 1. Will we march and fire speak, bringing fiery, fresh critique, trashing stifling black mystique, not sitting silent and weak? Will we defeat boss tweet, turning up our street heat, fighting for the driver's seat, making slaughter obsolete? to. Yes, we say no to hungry Budapest about to bite our butts. No to gremlin gangster punctuating life sentences with a little poison. No to thin-skinned strong men, to never ever wrong men. Yes, we say no to losing our heads in public places, no to embassy butchers, no to facial recognition, knowing our shadows' whereabouts, no to murderous monarchs, no to Heil Hitler, no to Howdy Modi. Yes, we say no to body snatchers on theocratic cul-de-sacs, no to violent dress code enforcers, no to capital punishing morality police, no to Texas Taliban, hot orange buoys and barbed wire wounds, making America great again. 3. And yes, we promise the people of the world no more drunken Negroes, bloodshot eyes rolling round in their heads, happy dancing thin ice, electric sliding slick slogans. Yes, we can, and bottle Jim Jones juice for regime change you can believe in. Yes, we promise people of the world no Negro swearing black magic mumbo jumbo, wink, wink, nod, nod, coded communication with Oval Office occupants. That all alphabet agency affiliated white folks simply cannot decipher. Yes, we promise people of the world no red hot Negro tongues, licking bloody combat boots, per post surgical strikes on hospitals, post tons of guarantees to hold his feet to the fire. Yes, we promise people of the world never again. No silence of the lambs, spookism years, no 3-monkey drone ranger deporter-in-chief crime spree years, no nappy-headed foolishness of no demands on Dems. Yes, we promise people of the world no unhoused Negroes wandering cruel streets of capitalism mumbling, protect and respect a Wall Street servant, pardoner of subprime predators, thieves who wiped Black wealth in homes from cooked books. Yes, we promise people of the world, salt of the earth Negroes will not heal, repudiate resistance, abandon mass struggle, leave liberation on shoulders of the road to chase optical delusions, superhero flying stars and stripes to rescue.
Thank you so much, Raymond Nat Turner. Now I'm going to introduce Bruce, who's going to read a statement and moderate this next section here.
All right, so I'm going to, I have a statement here from the Veterans for Peace in support of this teach-in and webinar. Okay, Iranian student and political groups, and especially prisoners themselves, are right now calling for international solidarity, calling on us to act right now to free Iran's political prisoners. As anti-imperialist veterans of the U.S. military, we stand with the people of Iran against any and all aggression by the United States and its Zionist and other allies. We have learned some of the horrors of U.S. imperialism inflicts on people of the world through being part of the war machine. We have come to realize that people everywhere have basic rights as people. And on this basis, we stand with the people anywhere who are denied those rights. There is an emergency due to executions and repression in Iran. This takes place in the midst of the U.S.-Israeli genocide in Gaza. As Iran gears up its confrontation with those committing the genocide, because of this, the confrontation, the prevailing view among serious opponents of genocide, including many of our fellow veterans, is that the Iranian state should not be criticized in any serious way at this time. Here's the problem. We live in a world overwhelmingly dominated by capitalist and imperialist system. All states that are participating parts of this system, on whatever level, act in the interests of their own ruling classes, not those of the people, domestically or elsewhere. In the case of Iran, this means the interests in being a dominant regional power in semi-alliance with Russia and China, imperialist powers coming into conflict with the US and its allies. All these actors have larger systemic interests opposed to any real struggle for liberation. The teach-in being called for by the International Emergency Campaign to free Iran's political prisoners now on August 25 is an opportunity to get into some key questions. What is the emergency facing prisoners and political protests in Iran? What is a real anti-war struggle under these conditions? How do we support the people of Gaza and Iran without relying on reactionary governments? Can we get away from the whole logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend? How do we support solidarity between Iranians and Palestinians? That statement was signed by Peter Shoemaker, United States Navy, 1977 and 1984, and a member of Veterans for Peace, by James Williams, Veterans for Peace, Daniel Ellsberg, Chapter 92 of Seattle, and Martin Coons, United States Navy, 1970-1976, member of Veterans for Peace. Thank you.
Yes, just to make clear, that's a individuals from the Veterans for Peace and not a organizational statement, you know, just to make that clear. I think we're going to hear from Sharat Lin.
Okay, so my name is Sharat Lin, and I'm with the San Jose Peace and Justice Center, also with an organization called Human Agenda and the Initiative for Equality. And I've been a long time analyst of the Middle East and a member of these organizations, and was a founder of many others, many decades ago. I just want to say that I'll keep my comments very short, because I'm just basically supporting what has been said today. There's no question that Iran, I mean, ever since, I mean, it's both. Remember, it's both the monarchy under the Shah, as well as under the Islamic Republic, that political prisoners have been a feature of both of these regimes. And we as people of the world, as humanitarians, we stand against any kind of political imprisonment, political executions. And it's important to observe that the political executions in Iran and for that matter in a number of other countries, varies. It varies with the kind of pressure that is put on these countries from the outside. And in the case of Iran, it's particularly notable the U.S. sanctions, its U.S. Pressure on Iran ever since the Islamic Republic was established, because that was an overthrow of a U.S. A client state that is under the Shah. So the U.S. was very much against the overthrow, obviously, of its friend, the Shah. And as the sanctions have varied, and then there are other pressures, such as through essentially U.S. proxies like Israel, which is now in a military confrontation with Iran. Whenever these kinds of pressures on Iran increase, we find that the repression also increases inside Iran, because the government in Iran feels less and less secure. And so there's some justification for its insecurity, but still we have to stand for human rights and for the particularly the heroic women of the women like freedom movement and the struggle for democracy in Iran. I want to say that of course this is not limited to Iran. We are not focusing exclusively on Iran. There are similar situations in Afghanistan. We have the situation in Iraq of the kids who were born to ISIS members. They are not being reintegrated into Iraqi society. So there are tremendous human rights violations throughout the region, and we have to stand up for these human rights. And finally, I want to mention in particular, because this time is one where the world is focused on the genocide in Gaza, and the background to that being the occupation of Palestine, both the West Bank and Gaza, and the even for that matter the conditions of exclusion of Palestinians from Israel proper, and because of the eyes of the world are focused on this, there's a tendency to think that, well, Iran is a hero because it is supporting the Palestinians. It is giving more support, through its allies like Hamas and Hezbollah to the Palestinian resistance, and that's true. It is doing that, but at the same time, that is not an excuse for executing political opponents and people who are standing up for women's rights and democracy in Iran. And so this is just something that we the people must stand on the right side of history on all issues. We have to stand on principles and stand against U.S. imperialism, above all against Israeli Zionism and the apartheid state, and also the repression in Iran and other countries in the region, and the executions that are taking place. These have to stop. Thank you.
We're going to watch Toomaj Salehi, the revolutionary rapper.
میدون جنگه از هر رنگی هستی، بیا که بدون تو یه خونه لنگه. میدون جنگه بیا که وقت تاختن تو دل دشمن بدون ترسه. میدون جنگه دارا و ندار از هر قوم و تبار مثل فشنگ قطار. میدون جنگه تیغه شمشیر عشق شهامت و زین کن و جنس سپر وفا. فصل اتحاد مرگ اختلاف افتخار تکه کنم به هموطن بشم تکه گاهش. شروع خروش و طغیان مردمه چشم ساره فصل سمزدایی وسط باز و حزب باد هر تفکری که داری با هر دین و آیین. کنارمون بیست سالها کنارت ایستادیم ما نعره خشم هزار بی صداییم شورشی کم ریشه انقلابی داریم عرب و آشوری ارمنی ترکمن مازنی سیستانی و بلوچ و تالش و تات و آذری کرد و گیلک لور فارسی قشقایی ما اتحاد رودهاییم دریاییم ورزشکار و هنرمند دست فروش تا کاسب از محصل و معلم مهندس تا کارگر میکنیم کرگوش دیکتاتور رو با ساز حق زن زندگی آزادی میجنگیم تا پای مرگ شونه به شونه پا به پا دیوار دفاعی باورم به هم بستگی مثل ایمان الهی مثل مسخ دین مثل مجنون بی باکسینه چاکی میران تومه مطیع این بیگانه ها نیست میدون جنگه اثر رنگی هستی بیا که بدون تو یه خونه لنگه میدون جنگه بیا که بخت تاختن تو دل دشمن بدون ترسه میدون جنگه دارا و ندار اثر قوم و تبار مثل فشنگ قطار میدون جنگه تیغه شمشیر عشق شهامت و زین کن و جنس سپر وفا دستای گره تو دست هم جهان تو دست ما دانشجوی قهرمان تا خیابون و رپ فارس ایران و فروختن رفیق رفت خونت به باد وقت تصفیه است میذاریم جلوشون صورت حساب میدون جنگ خورشیدو گرفتن خواب خوش به شب نذاریم براشون نه تلاطمم موج دارم پشتبانم به ایرانه به میلیونه بدهکاریم به این خونه آزادی رو آبادی رو بدهکاریم و شادی رو واسه دیکتاتور و شغالاش و حامیاش بند و گرفتاری رو میدون جنگ جان ازم پا پس نکش با جنم با هم تهش رو میبینیم چون فتح میکنیم میبینید که جنگی شدیم چه نسلی تولید کردید که ریز و درشش هم ضدتن بی باکه تشه یه جور آزادی از زندگی سیرابه شکوه ما اتحاد آینده‌تون سیاهه شبح میشیم تو شب کابوس میشیم براتون در پس این دوزخ فانوس دیدیم در آن سو دار جلو دارم نیست نه سرکوب و نه قانون نره میکشم و میام جنگجوی پر هیاهو میدون جنگه اثر رنگی هستی بیا که بدون تو یه خونه لنگه میدون جنگه بیا که وقت تاختن تو دل دشمن بدون ترسه میدون جنگه دارا و ندار اثر قوم و تبار مثل فشنگ قطار میدون جنگ تیغه شمشیر عشق شهامت و زین کن و جنس سپر وفا میدون جنگ
From Outer National. I'm here with Toomaj Salehi, the brilliant, courageous, and defiant artist, musician, rapper, who right now is imprisoned in Iran for standing up and supporting the Woman Life Freedom Uprising, and for all his songs in defiance against the system of exploitation, brutality, religious fundamentalism. And so I am here in Cali, Colombia. Estamos en Cali, Colombia, con Toomaj Salehi. Free Toomaj. Free all political prisoners in Iran.
That's Miles Solay from the band Outer National. And now we're going to have concluding remarks from Dolly Veale.
I just want to say we're coming up on the anniversary of the Masajina Mini Uprising, which was September 2022. And also we're coming up on the anniversary, if you can call it that, of the 1988 massacre, which happened in August, September of 1988, where over 5,000 prisoners were murdered in a span of a couple of months. This is a fight that's very serious in terms of there's a call, including especially from the women prisoners of Evin, there's a call for people to take up this fight against executions throughout Iran, and for people to support the struggle around the world.